Frank Ehfosa, widely known by the nickname Efosa, was a name that echoed with both fear and fascination among those who knew his story. He was a prominent and deeply feared figure in the Black Axe confraternity, a group that had gained a reputation over the years for its influence and presence within Nigerian universities, particularly during the 1990s. Ehfosa was born into privilege. His family was not only wealthy but also highly influential in Nigerian society during the late 20th century. By the 1990s, the Ehfosas were regarded as a household name in elite circles. Their affluence was evident in every aspect of their lifestyle, from their sprawling mansions to their strong political and social connections. Growing up in such an environment, Ehfosa had access to everything a young man could ever desire, except perhaps a sense of inner peace. Even before his university days, Ehfosa had a striking presence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a face that rarely showed emotion. Many who met him described him as someone with a naturally intense and commanding aura. His voice, deep and firm, carried the weight of authority even when he spoke casually. He was known to intimidate people without saying much. His posture, his stare, and his quiet confidence did most of the talking. When Ehfosa gained admission to the University of Benin in the early 1990s, he was already known among peers as someone who did not tolerate disrespect and often got into conflicts with other students. He carried himself like someone who had nothing to prove yet seemed ready to take on any challenge. It was not long before he caught the attention of existing members of the Black Axe confraternity, a group that thrived on influence, fear, and loyalty. His decision to join the confraternity only amplified the traits he was already known for. What was once a tough exterior now became something more dangerous. His involvement with the Black Axe gave him both structure and freedom, the kind of freedom that, when given to someone already prone to confrontations, could quickly spiral into something dark. At the University of Benin, Ehfosa's name began to circulate in whispers and warnings. Students, especially those in their early years, were told to avoid getting on his bad side. Tales of his involvement in confrontations, secret gatherings, and dangerous missions became part of campus folklore. He was said to have played roles in numerous campus-related incidents, including confrontations that left many shaken and unsure of their safety. The most significant of these incidents occurred during an alleged conflict between two rival confraternities. According to several unverified reports from students at the time, a serious clash erupted on campus grounds, and Ehfosa, along with a group of his fellow members, was said to have been involved in planning and executing a mission targeting a high-ranking member of another group, the Air Lords. The incident created widespread panic within the university. Although exact details remained murky, many students claimed to have seen Ehfosa at the scene, and his name came up repeatedly during the university's internal investigations. With mounting pressure from students, parents, and law enforcement, the school administration had little choice but to act. After gathering multiple reports and testimonies, the university made a decisive move. Ehfosa, along with 5 other students, was expelled from the institution. The expulsion made headlines in campus newsletters and spread quickly across student networks. This marked the end of Ehfosa's time at the University of Benin, but it was not the end of his story. Rather, it was the beginning of a new chapter. After being forced out of the University of Benin, he set his sights on a new environment, Obafemi Awolowo University. There, a new narrative would begin, one that would further shape the legend and legacy of Frank Ehfosa. After his expulsion from the University of Benin, Frank Ehfosa, known on the streets and among his peers as Ehfosa, faced one of the few true moments of reckoning in his life. His actions on campus had reached a tipping point, and despite the influence and wealth of his family, not even their connections could prevent the university's final decision. The institution had no choice but to distance itself from a student whose name had become closely tied to campus unrest and alleged involvement in underground activities. At home, the atmosphere was heavy. His parents, particularly his father, a man who had built his fortune through years of hard work and public trust, were deeply disappointed. For them, this was not just about academics. It was a stain on the family name, a mark that could not be easily erased in elite circles where reputation was everything. Frank's mother, though heartbroken, stood by him. She believed her son could change, that the storm that had surrounded him at the University of Benin was the result of youthful recklessness and peer influence, not the true nature of her child. After several months of tense family discussions and quiet interventions behind the scenes, the Ehfosa managed to pull a few strings and secured him another opportunity, admission into Obafemi Awolowo University, one of the country's most respected academic institutions. It was a fresh start, a second chance to rebuild not only his academic standing but also his life. Before he left, his parents sat him down for a long and emotional conversation. They begged him, with all the seriousness they could muster, to avoid any form of confraternity activity or association. His father's voice trembled as he reminded him, "This is the last time we can help you, Frank. If you throw this away, you're on your own." For a while, it seemed like Efosa had listened. He arrived at Obafemi Awolowo University quietly, blending in as just another face in the crowd. He enrolled in a diploma program in physical and health education and was allocated a bed space in one of the campus halls. His room 273, soon became more than just a place to rest. It was the beginning of another chapter, both similar to and more complex than the one he had left behind. Despite his parents' warnings, Efosa had no intention of turning a new leaf. If anything, his expulsion from the University of Benin had hardened him. In his mind, the blame was not his to bear, it was the environment, the system, the people who couldn't handle his strength and presence. Within his first few weeks on campus, he had already identified fellow members of the Black Axe confraternity who were quietly operating within the university. The bond they shared, deep, secretive, and rooted in loyalty, was stronger than any family advice or warning. Among the students who shared room 273 with him were two younger boys, K, a 100-level economics student who had just started his journey at the university in 1998, and Caleb, another wide-eyed fresher eager to make sense of the new world he had just entered. K was smart, curious, and deeply fascinated by campus culture. He looked up to Efosa, whose calm but commanding presence quickly filled the room. From the way he dressed to how he moved and spoke, it was clear that Efosa was no ordinary student. He carried himself like someone who had seen more than most, someone who had stories that could never be told in broad daylight. It didn't take long before K began to gravitate toward him. Conversations that started off about academics and hostel routines gradually shifted into deeper topics: trust, brotherhood, power, and the unseen structures that controlled campus life. Efosa, though careful not to be too direct, began to paint a picture of life as part of a group that offered protection, purpose, and a sense of belonging. He was subtle but deliberate, using his own experience as a silent example of what it meant to walk through campus with confidence and influence. Caleb, on the other hand, was more cautious. While he admired Efosa's charisma, he often kept to himself, watching from the background. When Efosa began encouraging both K and Caleb to consider joining the brotherhood, it sparked many late-night conversations between the two boys. K was intrigued. The promises of power, respect, and protection were tempting, especially for someone just starting out in an environment that could be both exciting and intimidating. Caleb, however, grew uneasy. He saw the unspoken danger, the weight of decisions that could not be undone. Eventually, when the moment came to make a choice, K stepped forward. Whether it was loyalty to Efosa or a desire for something greater, he embraced the path that had been offered to him. Caleb, despite being close to crossing the same line, changed his mind at the last minute. Something inside him pulled him back, the quiet voice that told him the price might be too high. From that point onward, the dynamics of room 273 began to shift. Efosa and K became closer, bound by a shared secret and the beginning of a journey that neither of them fully understood at the time. Caleb, still a friend, now felt like an outsider in his own space. The room that once buzzed with simple student energy had taken on a new atmosphere, quieter, heavier, charged with things unsaid. Unbeknownst to many around them, the seeds of something much larger had already been planted. And once planted, those seeds would begin to grow, changing lives, shaping destinies, and leaving behind stories that would be whispered about for years to come. Efosa was a man who rarely accepted defeat, especially not from someone he considered an ordinary freshman. When Caleb, his younger roommate at room 273 in Obafemi Awolowo University, backed out of joining the confraternity, it did not sit well with him. From the beginning, Efosa had handpicked Caleb as one of the next recruits into the brotherhood. He believed that, like K, Caleb could be shaped, molded, and brought under the wing of the Black Axe. So when Caleb chose to walk away, Efosa took it personally, not just as a rejection of his offer, but as a challenge to his authority and influence. Refusing to give up easily, Efosa began to devise subtle ways to draw Caleb back into the fold. He didn't resort to threats or force. That wasn't his style, at least, not at this stage. Instead, he employed manipulation wrapped in friendliness and charm. One of his most common strategies involved organizing social gatherings, what appeared to be fun, innocent parties. These events were usually filled with music, laughter, and most importantly, attractive young women who seemed to take a sudden interest in Caleb. Unbeknownst to Caleb, most of these girls were not randomly interested in him. Many of them were connected to the confraternity or loyal to its members. Their assignment was simple: draw Caleb into their world, make him feel special, and gently nudge him toward accepting the invitation he had once declined. They invited him to house parties that didn't exist, hangouts that ended up being strategy meetings in disguise, and events where conversations about brotherhood were slipped in like casual jokes. Caleb, although flattered by the attention and tempted by the promise of excitement, began to sense that something wasn't right. He noticed patterns, how the parties always ended in conversations about loyalty, power, and belonging. He observed how the same faces kept reappearing in different places, always smiling, always welcoming, but somehow too polished, too intentional. Over time, the charm began to wear thin. The more he resisted, the clearer it became to Efosa that Caleb would not be swayed. Eventually, Efosa gave up on trying. It was not in his nature to waste time on efforts that bore no fruit. He shifted his focus elsewhere, leaving Caleb to his own path. But while Caleb had escaped the pool, Kay, the other roommate who had accepted the invitation, began to feel the weight of his decision more heavily with each passing day. Kay's early days in the brotherhood were filled with excitement. He was welcomed with warmth, given tasks that made him feel important, and showered with attention that boosted his self-worth. But as the weeks turned into months, the veil of glamour began to lift. The reality of life as a confraternity member was far more demanding than he had imagined. Kay lost something that he never expected to lose: his freedom. He was no longer his own person. Every move he made had to be calculated. His time was no longer his own, it belonged to the group. His studies began to suffer, as he often had to skip classes to attend meetings, travel off campus for undisclosed errands, or simply recover from sleepless nights. His priorities shifted, not by choice, but by pressure. The boy who had once walked into the university full of dreams and ambition now moved through each day with an invisible burden on his shoulders. Unable to carry it alone, Kay eventually turned to the only person he could still trust: Caleb. One quiet evening, while the campus buzzed with the usual nighttime activity, Kay sat beside Caleb and opened up. His voice was low, almost like a whisper, but heavy with emotion. He spoke of how much he regretted his decision, how he missed the simplicity of being an ordinary student, and how he wished he could go back to that moment when Efosa first made the offer. Caleb listened patiently, offering no judgment. Deep inside, he felt grateful that he had walked away when he had the chance. While Kay wrestled with regret, Efosa's pattern of life at room 273 grew stranger by the day. He was almost never around. Weeks would pass without a single sighting of him in the room. His bed remained untouched, his belongings always in the same place. When he did show up, it was usually in the dead of night. The sound of his footsteps echoing through the corridor would announce his arrival, but he never stayed long. Before the sun could rise, he would vanish again. Speculations began to swirl around the hostel. Some believed he was involved in activities that took him off campus frequently. Others whispered that he was hiding, lying low to avoid being caught off guard by rival groups. The truth remained unclear, but one thing was certain: Efosa lived a life few could understand, and even fewer dared to question. Within the walls of room 273, the three young men who once shared simple jokes and meals were now worlds apart. Efosa had become a ghost-like figure, floating in and out of their lives. Kay was caught in a struggle between the world he had entered and the one he had left behind. And Caleb, though still free, now carried the emotional weight of watching his friends suffer, and narrowly escaping that same fate himself. Life at Obafemi Awolowo University continued, but for the boys in room 273, nothing was quite the same anymore. By the late 1990s, the quiet undercurrent of tension between members of the Black Axe confraternity and the Student Union government, SUG, at Obafemi Awolowo University had begun to boil over. What had started as whispers and brief altercations quickly escalated into something far more serious. There were growing reports of clashes between known confraternity members and representatives of the student government. Allegedly, the SUG, determined to restore peace and discipline to the campus, began taking bold steps to curb court-related activities. In one of their most daring actions, the student government reportedly worked with local law enforcement and campus security to apprehend several individuals believed to be affiliated with the Black Axe group. The arrest and detention of these individuals sent shockwaves throughout the campus and beyond. Though details remain hazy, some students whispered that Efosa might have been one of those arrested, while others insisted he had somehow managed to stay ahead of the law. Either way, his name, already associated with secrecy and power, was on everyone's lips. Those who were arrested spent several months in custody. For many within the Black Axe Brotherhood, the experience left deep emotional scars. They saw the arrest as a betrayal, a humiliation not just to their members, but to the entire brotherhood. Their anger festered during those months, growing stronger with each passing day. And when the detained members were finally released, they returned not with humility or reflection, but with vengeance in their hearts. Behind closed doors, meetings were called. On the 7th of July 1999, one such gathering took place in the same city that housed Obafemi Awolowo University. It was no ordinary meeting. It was a convergence of members, many of them from other universities and colleges of education. They came from across the region, united by a shared cause, retaliation. There, they discussed what had transpired, and their resentment toward the student union leaders who had dared to stand against them. Strategies were whispered. Decisions were made. And with grim resolve, they prepared for what would become one of the darkest nights in the history of the university. 3 days later, on the night of July 10, 1999, terror descended upon the campus. Under the cover of darkness, a coordinated attack was launched. The campus, usually lively and filled with laughter, music, and student chatter, became a place of chaos and fear. The attackers, believed to be members of the Black Axe from multiple institutions, moved swiftly. Several students were injured, and at least 5 lost their lives in the tragic incident. Among those lost was a respected and outspoken student leader, the General Secretary of the Student Union government, fondly known across campus by the name Afrika. Afrika had been a powerful voice for justice and peace among students. His charisma, intelligence, and fearlessness had made him a beacon of hope, especially in the fight against campus cultism. His death shook the university to its very core. News of the attack spread rapidly. Shock turned into sorrow, and sorrow quickly morphed into anger. For days, the campus was in mourning. Vigils were held, tears flowed freely, and the school grounds bore the weight of a tragedy that words could not describe. But the grief soon gave way to a determined pursuit of justice. Enraged students formed such groups, combing through every corner of the campus and the surrounding areas, desperate to find those responsible for the attack. They refused to let the blood of their peers go unanswered. Ehfosa, once seen as a shadowy figure who moved with confidence and mystery, was now on the run. Whether he had participated directly in the attack or not was still unclear, but his name surfaced too many times to ignore. Rumors swirled that he had been seen trying to leave the city quietly, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But fate had a different plan. Somewhere along the outskirts of town, he was caught by a group of students who had been on high alert. Recognizing him immediately, they brought him back to the university grounds, specifically to the main school hall, where a large crowd had already gathered. There, under intense questioning and in full view of fellow students, Efosa admitted that he had been part of the planning and execution of the attack. His confession, whether forced by fear or guilt, confirmed what many had already suspected. Soon after, he and a number of others who had also been identified were handed over to the police. For a moment, it seemed like justice had prevailed. The community began to breathe again, hoping that accountability would bring peace. However, in the weeks that followed, strange developments unfolded. While many of the arrested remained in custody, reports began to circulate that Ehfosa was no longer being held. No official statement was made, and the authorities offered no clear explanation. But those close to the matter claimed that his release had been quietly arranged, allegedly through the influence and financial power of his parents, who were said to be among the wealthiest families of their time. The whispers didn't stop there. Soon, it was rumored that Ehfosa had been flown out of the country, his destination, France. Some said he had been sent there to continue his education under a new name and identity. Others believed it was simply a way for his family to protect him from the legal consequences of his actions. Whatever the truth was, one thing remained certain: his departure left a deep scar on the university and the people who had known him. For the students of Obafemi Awolowo University, July 10, 1999 would never be forgotten. It stood as a painful reminder of how deeply campus cultism had infected the academic environment, and how far-reaching its consequences could be. And as for Room 273, once filled with laughter, debates, and youthful dreams, it now stood as a silent witness to a story that had taken a dark and irreversible turn.